All right. I think we're all set to
Bam.
go. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Rich Experiences. Rich Experiences is an opportunity for colleagues and friends of the tours and activities industry to share their experiences and expertise as business owners and industry leaders. So join us as we chat about our journeys, our lessons learned, highs and lows, decisions made, and also money and finances.
We are here on Facebook Live in both the Tours Strategy Facebook group and the Profitable Facebook group. You can use the chat in either of those groups to engage with our guests and experts as they share with you their rich experiences.
Live richly, share deeply, and nurture profitable businesses.
After the live event, you can find the replays on the Priestess of Profits YouTube channel and the Ascent Business Financial Strategies YouTube channel. Please subscribe to us on YouTube and be sure to tell your friends about how awesome this experience is.
And now to introduce your hosts and our special guest today. Zeb, do you want to go first?
I'd love to, Ingrid. Thank you. So I am Zeb Smith, the founder of Ascent Business Financial Strategies. My mission is to help operators grow profitable and thriving adventure businesses. Industry-friendly strategic planning and financial management strategies built for boom and bust seasons. I love helping owners build successful businesses that both deliver on your quality of life goals and set you up for financial success.
And I am Ingrid Edstrom of priestessofprofits.com in lovely Ashland, Oregon, where I am working to make the world a better place, built upon a foundation of thriving small businesses. I specialize in business strategy and financial workflow design for tours and activities companies, really focusing on creating a healthy and abundant money mindset so that business owners can develop more holistic financial and accounting practices that are in alignment with their personal business values and goals.
We are so excited to introduce our special guest today, Eric Mindling. He is an author, photographer, blogger, and the owner of Traditions Mexico, a cultural tour business located in Oaxaca. Eric, we are excited to hear you share your story of your business, particularly the beautiful transformation you experienced as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yay! Hi, Eric.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, Ingrid and Zeb, so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So Eric and I have known each other for many, many years now and have worked together in the past. And I got to kind of see the growth of Traditions Mexico. And I would love for you to share kind of your vision of Traditions Mexico and why did you become a tour operator?
Well, Traditions Mexico was born in 1996. I am from the United States, but I moved to southern Mexico, to Oaxaca, Mexico in 1992, and was drawn there by some yearning inside of my being, some strong, persuasive yearning inside of my being, to go and be someplace on this planet where it felt like people were much more rooted and connected to the world that they lived in, more connected to community, more connected to family, more connected to the world that gave them food. You know, I didn't have words for that when I was this young guy. I could feel it. And this is what drew me to Mexico, to southern Mexico in the first place. The work I initially did was buying pottery in rural pottery villages and shipping it to Santa Fe, New Mexico, to a store in Santa Fe, New Mexico. What was interesting about, there were many things interesting about that work, but related to tourism, which I didn't have a notion of back then. I didn't go to Mexico to think I was going to be a tour guide. But I was traveling around into fascinating rural communities, hanging out with ancestral potters and loving every minute of it. And a few years into that experience, I was thinking, there's got to be, I bet I'm not the only person who would find this world interesting, but I'm the only person that looks like me that's out here. And in a conversation with a friend, he said, well, why don't you, let's see, you know, he's a great brainstormer. What about offering tours into those communities? And I said, no, man, you're crazy. I mean, I don't know the first thing about operating tours. I wouldn't know what to do about that. It's like, that's not. But it was that kind of idea that sticks with you and bothers you and continues to bother you because there's something to it that that you know you ought to do something about.
Yeah.
And about a year later, I figured out how to create my first tour. It was a workshop. So that was 1996. That's how I got into tourism. And I mean, you know, those of you listening probably all had you all had your first tours, and there are these crazy nerve-wracking moments. I can remember all the customers, all the first tour. I was more prepared for that trip than any trip I've ever done, because I like minusculely thought about every single detail. When you don't know what you're doing, you got to over prepare. And that tour went off fantastically. The customers crying at the end of the tour because they were so moved by the experience. We spent 7 days in a village making pots with Zapotec potters, with potters that looked like that woman right there standing behind me, and a deep cultural immersion. And I knew that I'd found something that spoke to what mattered to me, created income for myself, and touched other people's lives. The potters that we visited were also crying. They hadn't had an experience like this before. They'd never had people come and stay in their village, in their home, and work with them that way. So I was like, oh, this is good stuff. That's how it began. That was the beginning of what became Traditions Mexico. And over the years that followed, I learned my trade better. I lived in a vacuum for so long, though. It's like me teaching myself how to do all this stuff. It's been amazing in more recent years to start having outreach with other tour operators, to go to events where there are other people in my business. I'm like, holy cow, I'm not alone in this. This is amazing. But in those days in the 90s and early 2000s, just me making this up, trial and error. I suppose a lot of you might be able to relate to that. It's like, whatever. But I figured it out, and was a one-man show for years and years and years, and slowly built up my business. My best practices weren't always the best, but it's what I could figure out. My bookkeeping was absolutely terrible. It was the thing I least wanted to do. It was a mess. But the business was small enough that, it kind of worked. And as the years passed and I learned my trade better, I started offering more trips. We focused, and we have always focused on rural traditional culture, traditional artisans, and taking groups out into the kinds of places that it would be hard for them to get on their own. Kind of soft adventure, because you're going into places that are uncomfortable, and then at the end of the day, we go back and sleep in a hotel that's, in most cases, you got your own bathroom and hot water and a decent bed. And sometimes we take you a little bit further, because that's how you get access to these amazing communities. And in Oaxaca, at least, in that, nobody was doing that kind of trip back then. Now that's grown. There's more of this culturally focused conscious tourism. I think that's fantastic. But when I began, that was a new thing, at least in Mexico where I was working. We focus on textiles, natural dyes, traditional farming, the way that food is prepared, eating food, of course, like on any good experience, potters. And over the course of the years, I started, once I learned what I was doing, I started bringing in team members to help me, started hiring guides. I stopped being the guy that did everything. Mm-hmm. And then it started expanding from there. Anyway, I could go on, but I think I've probably answered your question and then some, Ingrid.
Eric, I love what you said about how your friend and colleague planted that seed and that it just kind of niggled at you. And I've heard that before, that referred to as listening to the whispers. It's kind of our gut intuition when there's that little voice that's just kind of whispering, and it gets louder and louder until we have to pay attention. And oftentimes that is the universe paving a path in front of us, saying that we really, our calling it's that way, go follow it. And I love that that's kind of how you described it, was this intuitive, like almost clue by four experience of there's something you're supposed to do over here. And, it really is, for a lot of tour, for experienced leaders, what we're doing is a calling. And I think that that's huge and important. So what would you consider to be, I guess, your favorite part, the depth of what you look for in the experience, in it, like what really just calls you to Mexico?
Well, there's over the years, I've been able to sort of define that question that you're asking me, Ingrid. Like at first, I was just like going and looking for, that yearning I was speaking of earlier, looking for something that was missing and going and trying to find it, but without having quite an idea of what it was, the negative space inside of me. There's a term that I use called patio work or back porch work. And my ideal job description, which speaks to this question that you're asking me, the favorite part of the work I did in tourism, or the work I did before tourism when I was down there buying pottery and exporting it to the States. And let me paint the picture of what buying pottery looked like. Traveling to rural indigenous villages where they've been making pottery for 1 or 2 millennia, passed on from mother to daughter, the trade, right? I'm going to these ancient places, and there is a kind of presence and a kind of knowledge that's just embodied in humanity in places like that. It's wildly different from what I found where I grew up in the Western United States. So I spent a whole lot of time as a pottery buyer, and certainly in my early days as a tour guide, sitting on the shady side of the patio with some old-time potter, some old-time farmer, chewing the fat, just simply sitting there and talking while the turkeys wander around and the dog's barking in the distance, and you can smell the hot tortillas cooking in the smoky kitchen over there. And we're just talking about the weather. We're just talking about farming. We're just talking about what's going on in town that day, right? It's just the most simple and most, in some ways, enriching kind of human interaction. And in that patio work, I call it, there, between the words that are spoken, in the pauses and in the silences, or in the gestures, or in the way that you're served a meal, there's all of this learning that's going on for somebody like me. And it's a learning, not spoken, about ways of being human. Mm-hmm. And they're different lessons than I got in the world that I was born and raised in. And those lessons about ways of being human are about having more space, more peacefulness, more generosity, more time to sit and talk, because there's always time to sit and talk, in tune with the weather, paying attention to that because your livelihood depends on it, because when you plant the corn, when you harvest this, talking about how much clay they get from the clay mine and how they've been doing that for 15 generations. And like, oh, that's what they're really talking about is deep sustainability, right? But they're just not using those words. So my favorite part about all of this has been essentially the patio work, which is maybe a metaphor. It's a literal way of talking about being in a place, but it's also a metaphor for saying going and learning from deeply rooted cultures about things that my culture didn't have to offer me, that I think ground me in alignment towards well-being and are old human lessons about how we can walk on this earth and do it in ways that make sense for ourselves, for our community, and for this planet. And these old timers, these guys back here in these pictures, are those teachers without intending to be those teachers. So that's my favorite part of it, just hands down. And in the tourism work that I did, that's what I wanted to share. But you can't sell a tour saying we're going to go sit on the back patio and chew the fat with old timers and absorb wisdom. You can put that, you can sprinkle that into your text, but you got to have sort of a different narrative in there. And so many of the old timers that I was hanging out with were weavers, were potters. And because I was drawn to those handmade old, trades. We make the things we need to survive in this world from the natural world around us. Like that just drew me so much. It's part of that same bigger wisdom story that I was attracted to. So that's why I conjured trips around those concepts. But getting back to what you're asking, that's my favorite part, the patio work.
Yay.
I've got a question for you too. You did mention obviously it's been a lot of cultural discussion, and you did talk about like the sustainability to it, right? Not just within them, they have deep rooted sustainability, but I'm really curious on how you then grew, right? So this was the love, this is the passion. You started out as a small individual who brought in these tours, and then you expanded into having other guides, as well as having more and more of an impact and having more and more of an influence on the culture themselves there too, right? So how did you straddle that line of, bringing in the Western individuals to experience this, but not, overtake the local culture and still maintain some of that integrity?
Well, there's sort of two pieces to that. It depends on the community that we're speaking of. There's different communities have different experiences and different degrees of encounter and interaction with outsiders. And outsiders can be people from Oaxaca City, people from Mexico City, people from any city in Mexico, to people from other countries. And so there were a number of communities that we worked in often that were close to Oaxaca City, and were, over just the experience of being a community close to a city over the last 50 years, have had a whole lot of encounter with the outside world and have developed that into the way they organize themselves and their cultural ways, and, very specifically how they organize themselves financially, right? Like those villages close to the city financially do better because they have more access to people with money who want to buy services or things that they're creating. Those villages get lots of visitors, and we were some number of those visitors. The villages that maybe were more interesting in regards to what is our impact are the ones that are more rural. That there were villages that I went to with my group of foreigners that never had tourists show up in them before. And I'm not talking about a place that's never had foreigners show up in them before. I'm not talking about places that don't have electricity and access to television and the media, right? I mean, none of these places are like that. But there are places that a group of tourists has never showed up with cameras, interested in seeing how they make pots. I've got all kinds of stories about just the learning process of going into those places with the people that I took in there, and there was trial and error. I didn't know what's the best way to come into this place. What's the appropriate way? What's the correct formal way in some of these communities? And so I stepped on toes and I got realigned, and that's the learning process, right? There's first of all, my tour company was never large enough that in any of these more rural villages we visited more than twice or three times a year. So our impact was, for a few hours one day, twice a year, three times a year. It was relatively insignificant in that way. And that, had I been bringing in a tour group every week or every 2 weeks to one of these villages, my learning curve would have looked really different. And I would have had to come up with I would have wanted to come up with significantly different ways of figuring out how to make that impact feel okay. Because we were 2 or 3 times a year, it's a fairly light touch. We visit with a specific group of individuals in that town that I built a relationship. Off we go. They love having us there. It's win-win all around, and then we head out. And in the places they get more tourism, it's just easier there. We went there more because it was closer to the city. Easier because, let's see, how do I say this? Yeah, like I said earlier, they've already created structures and figured out how to deal with all of these visitors. Yeah. And, this question that you ask is multifaceted and complex, right? I could tell you stories about each of these communities and the dynamics that are in it and the pros and cons of it. And it's something that I observed all the time. It's like, well, what are the pros and cons of my tourism that works with different cultures and different communities? And am I bringing in something that is hopefully as good for them as it is for us as visitors? And the answer that I perceived time and time again was yes, because of a strong invitation to please come back, because of you see people radiate around interaction. My sense is that what we as visitors share that is valuable are kind of two key pieces. And one is relatively easy to measure, and that is that we're paying money for our experience, and access to capital is challenging in rural communities. So we're buying a meal, we're buying a demonstration of some process, we're buying, best of all, the things that people create, their weavings, their pottery, and all of that is so welcomed, right? All of that income is welcome, especially in places where it's hard to have access to income. And the other one that's very intangible, but is also incredibly valuable, is the gift of attention and the gift of appreciation. And any of us, anywhere watching this, appreciate somebody showing up, paying attention to who we are and what we're doing with some degree of respect, and being curious about it. It just feels good. We all want to be noticed for what we create, for what we do. And that's no different in rural Mexico than it is in any place on earth. So to have a group of 6, 8, or 10 people show up at your house and say, wow, we want to sit here and watch you make that pottery. And we're also curious about like where that food that you're serving us came from and how you made that tortilla. And we want to poke our nose into your kitchen because it's so damn cool. It's like people enjoy the hell out of that.
Yeah.
And it's not insignificant. It's not insignificant to have people show up and essentially applaud you, right? It feels good. And in places like rural Mexico, where, and these are indigenous rural communities, where you have been the underdog since the Spanish conquest 500 years ago, where the society has put you at the bottom rung of the hierarchy, to have people show up and say, what you're doing seems amazing to me, and we're going to support it with our attention, and we're going to support it with our money. That's a nice vote of confidence. Like I said, all of us can appreciate that kind of vote of confidence. It doesn't hurt, right? And it helps. So a long-winded answer to your question, Zeb. I kind of wound around it there, but I hope some of that made sense and landed.
You're a storyteller, of course. And no, It was great. Absolutely.
So let's touch on the business side of things, because I know you said that when you first got started, your bookkeeping was atrocious. And a lot of tour operators really kind of struggle with the business side of things. They get into being a tour company because they want to guide tours, and it's like the business side of it is almost an unfortunate side effect that they
so much so.
Yeah. So I would love to talk about the business side of it, because I know we're live in 2 different Facebook groups right now, the Cultural Adventure Business Tours Strategy group, and also the Profitable Outfitters group. And those are opportunities to really talk about the business side of running a tour company. And I would love to hear about the business side of Traditions Mexico. Of course, it always has to start with the vision, the why, the cultural side. But at the same time, in the same way that we all need to go to the doctor occasionally and get our blood pressure checked and make sure that our ticker is working properly, the finances are kind of the metrics of whether the business is healthy. And I would love to hear about some of your business health and some of the things that you did to make sure that Traditions Mexico is actually working.
Well, you asked me earlier what my favorite part of it was, and I talked about patio work. And so if you can imagine that scene as I painted it, we're sitting in a swept patio, wooden chairs in the shady side of a house, talking about this, that, and the other. What we never, ever, ever, ever talked about on those patios was business. We never talked about finance. We never talked about accounting. We never talked about taxes. We never talked about insurance. We never talked about marketing strategies, right? It's like, that was not the wisdom that I was absorbing from those rural traditional people. And it was not the wisdom that I was looking for. But I should have also been doing some other kind of work to learn that piece, because what you say is right on. I never got into the tourism business because I wanted to run a business. And this is, it's an interesting piece. And I bet a lot of you can relate with this. It's like, we don't do this because we're into business. If we were into business, we might be doing something different. Or we might be doing this and our businesses would look different. So my business skills, I studied art, I'm bad at math. um, my business skills were limited, and the learning curve on the business skills has been steep and rough. And once that business got slightly more complex, I needed to start putting it together. You know, you just got to figure out how to pay your damn taxes, and you got to figure out if you're making any money or not on these tours. You know, you got to, like, can I afford to pay somebody to do pieces of this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's lots of different learning pathways on that. And the piece of all of it that probably gave me the most anxiety was the accounting, was the tax paying, was keeping my numbers straight. Because that's the one I was the most least prepared for. I just didn't like that. And I put it off and put it off and put it off. And probably some of you know how miserable it is to try to do all your numbers at the end of the year. It's just the worst nightmare ever. And I mean, this is, Ingrid, this is going to sound like a plug for you, because because unintentionally it is. I finally started working with a bookkeeper a bunch of years ago, and this bookkeeper did what I expected bookkeepers to do, which was like keep my numbers in a row. And it was fantastic, right? We just sort of, you know, you did your straightforward numbers and you got your taxes paid. And at a certain point, I started working with Ingrid, and the game just changed for me. And it was, I mean, full disclosure, we don't work together anymore because I'm not doing this business anymore. And I think maybe your business has evolved too because of COVID, right? And we'll get to those stories. But for the years that I worked with the services that you were able to provide, I slept well. That's a short way of saying it. Once we got our stuff together, I slept well. Once Ingrid started coaching me on how to do our books, once we got our books aligned, once we got our QuickBooks set up, once we got our accounting all figured out, then we started looking at business at number strategy. Then we started looking at how to program for high season, low season. Then we started looking at how to set aside money so that there was always money for payroll, so that there was always money for taxes, so that there was money for marketing. Like I'm sitting here telling you guys this right now, and I'm actually getting goosebumps because this stuff excited me so much. And I'm the guy that I don't like any of this stuff, but it caused me so much anxiety to have the antidote to that delivered by a really capable partner helped me do things with my business and with my night's rest that I was unable to do before. And, you know, it's part of a mantra that I've got, which is build good teams. For a long time, I tried to do it all on my own. My business was small. I couldn't afford to do more than that. And, you know, I'm a good lone wolf. I can take care of this, that, and the other. And there were some things I did well, and a lot of things I did really poorly, but I didn't quite look that straight in the face, right? But bookkeeping, on the other hand, I had no qualms about how poor I was at that. And so over the years, I started to slowly build teams, and having somebody in the financial department that knew her stuff so well. And then I was starting to bring somebody in marketing that knew their stuff. And I started having guides that had super specific skills that I didn't. And last year I was bringing in somebody who I was hoping was going to understand business better than me, so that I could go back and do the porch work, patio work. So, I mean, that's answering your question, Ingrid. You know, something else I'll throw in there is to say that as my business grew and had more moving pieces, I became less and less enamored with it. I became less happy with what I was doing, because my role went from being the guy who went out and did patio work and who did scouting and doing the relationship building in all those rural communities, which was why I was in it in the first place, to being the guy behind the desk doing the business stuff. And I didn't go into the business to run a business, But that's the great irony, right? Oh, you're going to run a business, you got to run a business. You want to run a tour business, you got to run a tour business. And the more business I was doing, the less happy I was with it. And so slowly I was figuring that out and bringing in people who could run the business pieces of it so that I could eventually circle back to what I went into it for it in the first place. I'm fumbling English here, but y'all follow me. and
Just switch to Spanish.
Go back and do that patio work. What's that?
I said just switch to Spanish. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
I got real broken, so I might be able to keep up with you.
So there, I hope I answered some of that there.
Yeah. So I guess tell us then, where was your business at that point in March 2020 when things really started to shut down because of COVID-19?
Yeah, well, it was in the place I'm kind of describing here, which was that I had Ingrid doing bookkeeping and sort of financial conjuring and creating amazing systems. I had somebody who was working with me in marketing, and on March 5th, I had just hired somebody who was going to hopefully take care of business management stuff. So that, and my wheels were turning on these great, fun, creative daydreams. I built up Traditions Mexico in Mexico. I'd learned the ropes. I was a long ways from being that kid who was 22, who didn't know how to guide a tour. I knew how to do the tours. We had systems set up. I was like, all right, let's take this beautiful idea into other parts of the world. Focused around traditional culture, connection to community, bringing people together from these different worlds, and creating meaningful encounter. And so I was developing tours in Peru. I had my eyes on Japan around traditional arts and culture. India was big on my horizon. I had connections in these places. We were building something. We were selling something in Morocco. We'd actually just run our second year of initial trips in Peru. So, it's like, now I'm going to take this and I'm going to scale it. And what fun that will be. What a great adventure. And then, but, the secret side of it was, oh my God, there are so many moving parts to this. And I don't, it's like I'm pushing myself further out there than I'm ready to deal with, which is it's not the right place to be as an entrepreneur, but I'm terrifying myself. And also not sleeping well again, even though my numbers were in a row, I'm not sleeping well because there was, deep down inside of me, there was unhappiness. And I'd lie in certain nights and, I was 51 then or 50. Like, what am I doing with my life? What's going on with my life? It doesn't feel, it's not nurturing me. It's not feeding me. And it should be, because I'm on this creative adventure. I've established myself in this world. I've got a beautiful team around me. The work I'm doing is creating income and meaning for the people who are involved in it. And there's a lot of creativity in it for me as well. But it was grind. Despite all those positives, what it felt like was grind. Yeah. Get up and you worry about taxes and you worry about insurance and you look at your bank accounts and you make sure this is going on and you put this fire out and this fire out and this fire out. And then you're trying to find the new contact in, India that's going to be better, like all that stuff, right? Oh my. So that's where I was in March. Now, the part I just talked about was a very quiet part. I wasn't looking at that part, but I was feeling it, grinding away. And the exciting part in the story that I tell to people is like, Traditions Mexico is going great. We're going to change our name to Traditions Handmade. And we're going to start creating these tours in these locations. And like, people be like, man, I wish I had your job. That sounds so wonderful. I'd be like, yeah. And I'd be like, yeah, but I'm not sleeping well. So that was March.
Well, and the other thing with March, you were in kind of a unique position as far as US-based tour companies go, in that your season in Mexico was just wrapping up, whereas in the United States, a lot of tour operators were just getting started. So your
Yes.
high season going from October through March, you were coming off. And at that point, at the end of the season, you're fairly flush.
And it
So
was our best high season ever.
yeah. So I guess that was the really fascinating piece is, having gone through the accounting practices to get your business to the point where you were, had money set aside for marketing, had money set aside for taxes, had money set aside for rainy day and all of your
Yes.
direct
Yes.
expenses to put, prepayments down for hotels that needed to be reserved 2 years in advance and all of those things. It was set to go. And then all of a sudden, everything came to a screeching halt and you were flush because
Yes.
you had done the work, because you'd done the pre-planning, because you were prepared. Traditions Mexico is in a place where you could have let it just go on hibernation for a year or two and been fine.
We could have gone on hibernation and we had the phone call in March, Ingrid.
Yeah.
First of all, yes. Again, like it was so amazing to have our bookkeeping and number management system set up so that when high season ended and low season came, all of our storage bins were full of what we needed to get through that long low season, because our expenses were still happening, right? All the overhead was still there. So yeah, we were set up. We were well set up. And yes, we spoke in mid-March as COVID's raining down upon us, and we're all in this state of uncertainty about what's this going to mean. And it's funny to think back on this, a year and a half or whatever we are into this, but of course we couldn't read the future. And the thing then was to try to read the tea leaves and understand what is going to happen. Is this going to be over in a month or two? Is this going to be done by Christmas? Like none of us knew, right? And you and I talked, Ingrid, we looked at the numbers and it was really heartening, because what we saw is that not only did we have enough money to cover overhead through the low season, which is 6 months, we could continue at current expenses with the new marketing that we were going to be amping up, with the new manager that I was going to be bringing in, with paying everybody on full salary through December. So that was 9 months instead of 6. And it was like, oh, we got it in May. This thing's going to be so done by December. And then December we'll be in the middle of our season again, and we can start selling. And so after that, I was so at ease. And then I got in touch with everybody in my team and I said, we're cool, you guys, we're cool. And salaries as usual, life as usual. We'll spend this downtime to just build our systems, to do all the work inside the business that we haven't been doing because we've been working out there. And then to jump forward a month to April, a month of reading the tea leaves, what I saw was that this isn't going to be done by December. Mm-hmm. This is a pandemic, and these things don't just show up and go away, right? And we still didn't know a lot, but I had a month more knowledge, and at that point, it was time to make different decisions.
Yeah.
What were those decisions? So at that point, this was another month into it. You just hyped up the managers, and it was just this understanding that, our downtime is going to be a downtime. We're going to miss out on maybe a month or two of season, but we'll have another banner year come next year, right? Because of all the other we have going on. Well, a month later is kind of a gut check. So what was that next kind of decision that needed to be made?
Yeah, that decision was monumental, as it turned out. And what I was looking at was, it isn't going to be December. If it's not December, January, February, March, and our season winds down in March, then we won't likely see any income until October of, what would that be, 2021 this year? October of 2021 will be the next time we possibly see income, because that's when our season starts again. And that was 18 months out. Forgive me if my math's wrong. I've already told you guys I'm not good at that stuff. So, but I believe it was 18 months out. It was double. Yeah, it was double. The 9 months to December was going to be 18 to October. And so that was taking that nice amount of capital that was in the business, and if you're thinking of spreading butter on a piece of bread, It's enough for one piece of bread, but now you got to spread that butter on 2 pieces of bread. That's half as much butter on each piece of bread. How do we do that? How do we spread ourselves that thin over 18 months? And then it's still a gamble because we don't know what's going to be happening in 18 months. So it could be that after 18 months, I've spent every ounce of capital that my business has. I probably dug into any savings that I have in my personal world to just try to keep this business afloat on the gamble that by October, we can start bringing tours back. And I was like, that sounds like a really miserable position to be in. That's a really high risk thing to do. And I can, of course, ask everybody to go on half salary, half time, and string them along. Like, there are different creative ways to do it, but they all felt like these hard compromises and hard sacrifices. Mm-hmm. And so I spoke to, it was April 14th. This is the date I will probably not forget for the rest of my life. I spoke to a handful of, my wise advisors in my circle and talked about the conundrum. And sort of the option was come up with a couple of non-happy compromises or close the business, end the business, just step out of it, just step into something new. And the first two seemed logical and reasonable. I mean, my life path at that point was built on Traditions Mexico, growing to a certain point, selling the business by the time I was 60, taking that money and retiring, because Traditions Mexico is on that trajectory. Maybe I'd be 65, but I could count on the income that was coming. I knew my trade. I was established in it. I had a great team. I'd spent years and years and years and years building all the connections that I had in the world that allowed that business to happen, all the relationships in these rural communities. And to let that go is just ridiculous. We don't do that, right? You don't make a sharp right turn at 50 or 51 and step out of what you're doing if what you're doing is good, unless COVID comes along and says, hey. So, and in the way that I spoke about that friend years and years ago saying, oh, you could run a tour business, and that seeming crazy and also inspiring to me. I didn't actually voice it when I was speaking to my advisors initially, and I could also just close the business because I knew there was money in there and I could live off of that and do something else. But one of the advisors I was speaking to said, you could just close the business. There's no shame in it. And you can go forward and do something else. And I was like, really? That sounds crazy, but it excited me because there are other dreams percolating inside. There have been other dreams percolating inside. And there was the part that I was alluding to before about there's a lot of me that's disgruntled about what I'm doing, even though I shouldn't be, even though it's wonderful work, even though there's all kinds of approval from the world, even though I've been building this business for 20 plus years, all those reasons to stay with it. I should never step out of it. These are all the good reasons to continue doing this. Yeah. And, but really what I want to be doing now is a new version of that patio work. I'm talking about April. And this inside of me that hasn't been expressed because I've become this businessman. And, a number of years preceding that date, I'd started doing photography work, and the photography work had been met with a whole lot of encouragement and some degree of success. And that became a book. And it's that's what I want to be doing. But you can't make a living doing that. And besides, I got this good business to be running. And this is what I should be doing. And so COVID comes along and just shakes that all up, right? And I know that this story in all its iterations is true for so many of us around the planet today. COVID just comes up and shakes up the bucket, and all the silt that settled on the bottom in the last, the rest of the preceding years of your life is all now. How do you want it to settle down? It just gave me a chance to contemplate the wild unknown of taking a step into really unexpected future. And so April 14th, after doing some deep soul searching, I said, I'm closing my business. Let me qualify that. I'm closing 90% of my business, 80% of my business. I still work with a couple of customers who make life easy for me because they just bring me groups, and they're nice, juicy groups. And we go and we do, and they're like, we'll wait until the other side of COVID. So there's a little iteration of what was my business that's still alive. But on April 14th, I closed it.
Yeah.
I just said, I'm not doing it anymore. I don't want us to all take this risk and gamble and be hungry, beleaguered, demoralized, and anxiety-ridden creatures at the other end of this 18 or 24 or however long it will be. There are other ways to play the game of life that felt more uplifting. And so I stepped out, and that was a hard step to make. And there's been grief and mourning around that for months, and slowly reaching out to the team and saying, this is what we're doing, and you know, letting them go and seeing them go off into their worlds. Like, there's repercussions. But that's the decision I made back in April.
It's super fascinating to I hear you talking about it, and like, I remember that decision and the conversations we had around it back in, you know, March and April, and the conversations at that time. I love what you said about there's no shame in it. And that's one of the reasons why, Zeb, and I really wanted to talk with you about your experience with COVID, is because a lot of businesses through COVID have experienced a great deal of ups and downs. And it's amazing how personally we get attached to particular outcomes, and even to a certain extent define our personality based upon the things that we're doing. And if we're not doing those things, am I the same person? And the answer is, to a certain extent, no. That person who was doing those things might be gone. And there is a huge amount of mourning the passing of a stage of our lives, but also recognizing that there is no shame in that it's not a failure. I remember in those conversations, the excitement that you had at this idea of trying something new, and that it was like somebody had just written you a permission slip to actually do what you wanted to do.
Yes. COVID wrote that permission slip. I would not have done it.
Yeah. And it was the same thing for me. Like, I got shaken up in all the best ways to be able to take off a huge chunk of time and work on myself. And you and I kind of went through that journey together to a really big extent, and like, you know, developed, you know, good like self-work practices and a lot of good reading. And we've been talking recently about the fantastic book, The Soul of Money by Lynn Twist, which is really fantastic, and shifting our perspectives and views around money and finance and abundance and what those things mean, and the cultural paradigms in our dominant Western American culture surrounding those things, and how a lot of them aren't healthy. And a lot of people are kind of trapped in this workaday mindset. And it sounds like, to a certain extent, that was part of what needed to be let go of and also mourned. But now tell us what you're doing on the other side of it.
Well, I mean, first, you know, I want to speak to that piece that you're talking about identity. And for 20 something years, my identity really grew. Like, I was 25 when I ran my first tour. And so essentially half my life, my adult life, is built around an identity that was interconnected with being a tour guide, being the person who ran this tour company, being an expert in a certain realm. And to end the tour business is like all those trappings just fall off. And there's so much identity wrapped up with that. And it's uncomfortable to just feel this dissolving sense of self. You go deeper into it, and of course you realize it's a dissolving sense of one layer of self, right? A story about self.
Out of the way.
Yeah, and it's just no fun at all, you know. But then, and it's ongoing. I'm not like, you know, it's not like I'm at the other end of this and now I shaved my head and I'm a Buddhist monk and I got it all figured out, you know. It's like, it's an ongoing dissolution of, you know, but I gotta say, what a good positive experience. Like, anything that allows us to shift our perspective and let down some ego and and soften some of identity that's building and becoming more and more rigid with the passages of the years, to go through this huge shakeup. By necessity, pieces had to fall off and fall apart. And that's an opportunity for some freshness to appear, right? That's an opportunity for a whole lot of doubt and uncertainty, and the opportunity to be ignorant and go into things with an unknowing point of view. Like, all that stuff is really enriching in all these little ways, and it's a hellish journey at the same time. So, like, you know, this has been a bumpy damn year, but it has been driven by this enthusiasm and excitement about letting one thing go so that I can rise beyond that towards something that is more aligned with who I am as a human being. And, like, you know, I mean, to use a well-used metaphor, you know, the blossoming of, right? Like, we blossom multiple times in our lives. With any luck, we blossom all the time. There are major blossomings that can happen, and so the outer part is the green part, and out of, you know, the green wrapping of the bud, and then out of that comes the bright colored flower. And if the outer wrapping of the bud has been sort of the thing that grew to protect me over these many years, I'm making this metaphor up as we go right here, right, guys? So throw it in here. But what it feels like is that now that flower is peeking out, that flower which is pointing itself out to the sun, right? Of, here we go. And this is really exciting. And the world begins to pollinate me with opportunity. This is what life feels like now. And this is the last couple of months. And it's been a journey to get here. But what did I want to do? I wanted to conjure myself from something I was already cultivating and become a photographer who focuses his work on that very same world I've been talking about, which is the beauty and wisdom that is inherent in traditional cultures. And well, how do you do that? I haven't been a professional photographer before. I haven't made a living with photography before. You begin, and I don't have a business running tourism that takes up all my time. So now I can focus my daydreams and my daily efforts on trying to conjure up this vision of becoming a photographer. I now live in Santa Fe, New Mexico. That wasn't the case a bunch of months ago. Santa Fe is a center of arts, and it's a center of arts focused around traditional culture. I'm speaking to you right now from this wonderful 1,500 square foot studio space that I rent with my partner. You see photos of mine on the wall in large format, printed in the most elegant, high quality way that they can possibly be printed, beautifully framed. The printer, who is also a photographer who made those photos for me, is 2 blocks away down the street. That's just Providence providing. Who also curates photos for a certain venue here in Santa Fe. He said, Eric, I would love to include your photos in that venue. Let's put them on the wall in the venue. We just hung those last week. It's a hotel. It gets lots of traffic. That's going to drive sales. Because we have this studio space and we're starting to open it to the public, people are coming in here and seeing different things that we offer. They're seeing my photography and they're saying, you got to go big with this. They're saying, you need to take that into museums. That should be an exhibition at the, you know, name the fancy museum you want to daydream about. And so this kind of encouragement has been unbelievable for me, and I'm buying that dream. It's one I want anyway. Yeah. So one of the people I know here through the grapevine used to be a curator at the Smithsonian. Now we're starting to talk about how to create a traveling exhibition about this documentary work that you see behind me. And so one thing after another is unfolding. It took a while to get here, right? But this is part of the blossom. The blossom being that there's beautiful work that I can do with my artistic eye, my knowledge about traditional Latin America, and where I am at this point in my life, that I have to tell you, let's check back in a year. But if any of the daydreams that are spinning around in this head of mine come to fruition, and they will, because that's how my life has worked, I'm already having so much fun when I'm not like freaking out because this is a scary exploration. But where I'm going with this is so joyful. There's so much celebration in it. It's so uplifting. It also keeps me up at night. You're all going to think I have insomnia because I keep coming to this. but it keeps me up at night with excitement, which is, if you're going to be kept up at night, let it be about excitement, about all the fun ideas you've got spinning around in your head, about the tremendous enthusiasm, about feeling like just effervescent with possibility. And this is where I'm sitting now. And and again, it's just a year and change into this transition, and it's been a bumpy, slow year. And the terror part of me says, you're really going to be sorry, man. You shouldn't have done this, because you're going to be broken on the street. So when that monster voice isn't in there, the voice of enthusiasm says, oh God, yes.
Yeah.
This wasn't going to happen if I continued to run that worthy tourism business, if I continued to do what made all sorts of, if I continued to be attached to that smart pathway. I wouldn't be freaking out about money like I am right. Actually, I would be, because of COVID, right? But there is a new life inside of me blossoming.
Yeah.
Right now, there is an excitement about existing, that it is that effervescence that I'm talking about, and that I was looking for that in my tourism as it evolved, and I was finding it. I might have found my way there, but anyway, I guess what I'm doing is applauding that choice I made, and thank God I can. And may the next year go well, and I can feed myself, because I'm investing the money that was in the business to make these photos and pay my rent. Right? This is a gamble. I'm a startup, and I'm loving it.
Well, Eric, this whole story is just giving me chills. I'm thinking on behalf of like my clients, and I'm thinking on behalf of our audience, and, just the whole buildup of this story. It's like, oh man, we're going to build this up. Like Traditions Mexico is going to be flourishing coming into it. And then all of a sudden, boom, no, it's not. And that point and that decision to be able to close this down, I can only imagine how heartbreaking that was for you, as well as your team, your employees, your supporters, the audiences that are there in Mexico. I'm sure everybody really felt that. However, it is an opportunity in the positive light, is that and this is another thing that too, I think a lot of the audience resonates with also, especially those that are in that, 50, early 60 time period, that have been building up this business for their entirety of their life. They had, so many of my clients, I know this, and those that I speak with, had that same exact idea with what was going on. And that's changed, and that's a huge digestion to make to it. And I think, and I'm hopeful that a lot of them can appreciate, your openness to be able to express, what that took place, all those decisions that were made, as well as now looking at it saying, what, closing the doors was actually for the benefit, not just for me, but for the other stakeholders within the business too. And you as an owner, and I think a lot of owners oftentimes will put ourselves second to, the others that are within this. However, you did do your diligence, you did work with your team, to make sure that they were taken care of. And that you still were able to get that nest egg out of the business. It wasn't in the traditional form as you expected, but it did offer an opportunity for you to continue on with your passion again, just a passion in a different form. So, you build it up, and I think that we were all thinking it was going to work out real well, and then it just kind of crashed. But there's still so much opportunity that's there with you. And because of that financial work that you had done with Ingrid, and really the growth that you took as an owner as you were building this thing up, provided you that freedom and that opportunity to be able to make that kind of decision, and it wasn't that you just had to cut all your employees' ties right away. You could still nurture that and still continue to make that situation better. So I'm sure everybody's super appreciative of that. And I'm sure, are you keeping in touch with those employees and those guides, and as they're continuing their journey?
Yeah, I am, and it's interesting to watch how their lives unfold. Some of the guides that I worked with began as guides with us at Traditions Mexico, right? So they learned their chops with us, and there are tourism operations in Mexico that have made other choices over this time. There are some that were new and just had more vigor in what they were doing than I did, and they're holding on through this period of time. And I've seen actually all the guides that I worked with have found a way to reallocate with some of these different, and they're nice companies, like their values are aligned with values that I appreciate because there's lots of ways, as we all know, that tourism unfolds in different kinds of places, right? So, you call these boutique, is high touch the right word, but like really apparently strong relationships in the communities they're working with, small groups, beautiful relationships, it would appear, with customers and the contacts in the communities. Like, that's what we wanted to do, right? And so I see my guides landing in those places and starting to have work around that. The woman that I was going to hire for a manager sort of aligned and went off that way, though she hadn't worked in the industry yet. But so I was able to give my core team a bonus, it's an end of a COVID bonus, to give them a softer landing, because we all needed to figure out what we were going to do. And it was from one day to the next. And everybody's landed on their feet, which is nice to see. And, tourism is slowly starting to come back. It'll pick up for them. And yeah, I was very fortunate because the timing of COVID for Traditions Mexico cycle was good. It was on the high end of our financial circuit, and also because all the financial work we were doing allowed me to have that buffer anyway. Had it been on the low end of the cycle, there still would have been a buffer in there. It just wouldn't have looked the same. Yeah. I would have had to. It just would have been tougher. I got to say, I am fortunate because I didn't. My business didn't close, and I was broke. I would have been singing a different song right now. I have been empowered, but that empowerment came because of good management in the business, good financial management allowed that to be present. And had I been doing it the old way, it may have been there, it may not have been there. Who knows, right? Yeah. But it was, and that's allowed me to flourish, really, to flounder for a period of time after April. And now I'm beginning to flourish. It's been a hell of a year for floundering, man.
Yep. Well, we are reaching the top of the hour, and I want to wrap up fairly soon, but I really want to kind of leave with a solid kind of aha moment or a takeaway or epiphany. And for me, I think, Eric, it was what you were talking about of, those moments of that inspiration where you notice that tug, that voice in the back of your head, that yes. thing, and the intuition kind of took over and said, hey, there's a path over here that needs to be paid attention to. And in both of those situations, that path was extremely risky, but provided the most reward, the most personal development, the most personal learning and growth. And I feel like when we're playing the safe game, which is often the business game, we do the things that the numbers tell us to do. And we try to play it safe and, hedge our bets and mind our investments. And that is not a very fulfilling human experience. And I guess that's where we've been really looking at this from the perspective of a more holistic financial and accounting system, is that these businesses are here as part of our lives, not the other way around. And we really need to make sure that we're leading from those places of dreams, of inspiration. And if we're to the point where the dreams and inspiration are not what's keeping us up at night, maybe we're doing something wrong.
Yeah. And, this is something I tell my daughters because it's also what I've lived. And then we get lost, and then we realign, and then we get lost. But what I say to them is that our lives are our own. Yes. We can do with our lives what we choose to do with our lives. There are pathways that will be laid out for you. There are things that you should do. There are things that you're expected to do, but your life is your own. Listen to what's inside.
Yeah.
And follow that voice. That's how I wound up in Southern Mexico in the first place, doing beautiful work. That's how I wound up starting Traditions Mexico in the first place. But the voice gets lost with what makes sense. And, COVID gave me the gift of being able to listen in and find what makes sense. Yeah. But we're here once, we're not here that long, and let us spend our time here doing the thing that is the most beautiful thing we can do.
Yeah.
Whatever that may be for any of us. And it is easy to lose sight of that, and it is hard to find sight of that again. I feel like in this particular moment in my life, I'm finding my way back into doing the most beautiful thing I could do.
Yeah.
And in one more thing, which is that those little challenging aha moments, or the challenge, like, oh, you could run a tour business. Oh, you could stop running a tour business. Sitting right where I am on this couch 3 weeks ago, this woman who had a certain aura of power around her was sitting here looking at my pictures, and she was the one who was saying, you need to think big with these. Don't mess around with any small stuff. This imagery is powerful. The story you just told me about what's behind these images is meaningful and impactful. She said, go for the big. She said, Taschen, which is the best art publisher out there, she said, go to the Met, go to the Smithsonian, but go big. Yeah. And so what I was reflecting to you guys earlier in this conversation came out of that conversation, and it's the same feeling inside, folks. Like, oh shit, I can't imagine myself being what you just described, seeing in this work, and I haven't forgotten it since. And I'm just going to waste less time getting around towards it. I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. Why not? You know what? I'm going to go big, meaning that where can these images be placed in the world that's most worthy of their presence and reach the most eyes and touch the most souls, right? Yeah. Like, that's what going big means. It's like, let this work have impact. Let it move people. Let it tell the stories that it is capable of telling. And I'm the interpreter, but let the stories be told well, right? It's like, no, you don't need to stay in that small mindset that often runs around in this head. So that's where the thrill is now.
Love that.
Takeaway.
There's no such thing as should. It all comes down to, what do you want?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And that's very much like my takeaway of it all too, coming out of this, as I was listening to the story, as I was listening to Eric talk about it, I was envisioning that owner who was building up his business and working for the business versus the business working for the owner too. And of course, because of COVID, as you were saying, it was almost that catalyst that forced the switch. Without this case, that switch probably wouldn't have happened.
No.
And you're nodding and agreeing with me on that you would have still continued to be working for the business.
Yes.
So, I think it's more of an affirmation on how we all collectively are really, I think, as a culture, even within the tours and activities culture, as well as even just the global scale community members that I know and friends and colleagues and everybody else, is there's a lot of self-reflection taking place and really considering, well, what are our priorities? And that's one of those things that I've been working on with so many of my individual clients and through so many of the owners is looking at, no, this business has to serve us first. And, we do the mechanical little pieces, the little, what do you need your nest egg to be? And, those are the smaller things, but it really is setting boundary around who am I and what am I here for? And how can we get this business to serve me? And then from there, I think that just creates a lot of intention and a lot of opportunity to actually drive this thing in a direction that supports us, as well as better supports our customers and our employees and all the other stakeholders that are involved. So I really appreciate you, Eric, coming on and expressing that, and just sharing your story. I think it's super powerful. I really resonated with it, and I'm super thankful that you were open to exposing that to us. And I really do believe the audience that follows both Ingrid and I will relate to a lot of what's going on here. So you've been a heck of a kickoff to this whole Rich Experiences interview series that Ingrid and I have masterminded. So very much thank you for that.
Thank you for honoring me with the invitation, guys.
Yeah. And thanks to anyone who watched on Facebook Live and to anyone who's catching the replay on YouTube. We're so happy to have you in our community, and feel free to join the conversation in the Facebook groups, facebook.com/tour strategy. And Zeb, which is the Profitable Outfitters? Is it just /Profitable Outfitters?
Yes. Nope, it's facebook.com/groups/outfitters.and.guides.
Outfitters and Guides. Okay, wonderful. So yeah, check out those Facebook groups and join the conversation there. And you can tag Eric if you've got particular questions for him, or you can tag me and Zeb, and we're happy to answer your questions in those Facebook groups.
And join us next month for the next Rich Experiences. So at this time, we're going to be hosting it once a month on the second or third Tuesday. third Tuesday at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time.
Yeah.
So looking forward to chatting with you all then.
Yay. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Bye.